How could they pretend I didn't exist? I never thought I'd be the kind of person who gets cut out of their own family's will, but here I am, sitting in the back row of a stuffy attorney's office in Honolulu, watching my cousin grin like he just won the lottery. Because he basically did. My name's Rachel, I'm 32, and I've lived in Hawaii my whole life. My parents passed away when I was a teenager, so I was raised by my uncle, Uncle David. He and Aunt Marie took me in, gave me a roof, and for a while I believed I was one of their own. But blood runs deeper than promises, and I learned that the hard way. Uncle David built a successful landscaping business from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and by the time I graduated college, he had multiple contracts around the island and a solid reputation. I helped him grow that business. Every summer, every weekend during school, I worked in the office, ran payroll, met with clients. He always said, "This is yours as much as it is mine." I believed him. But when he passed suddenly from a heart attack last December, everything changed. His biological son, my cousin Brent, who barely spoke to Uncle David for years, flew in 2 days later with a slick suit and fake tears. I stayed up nights organizing the funeral, settling affairs, comforting Aunt Marie. Brent barely knew where the coffee maker was. So when the lawyer opened that will and read it out loud, I felt like the floor cracked beneath me. Uncle David left everything, the business, the house, the savings, to Brent, not even a note for me, not even a thank you. I remember gripping the edge of the chair, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there, silent, while everyone avoided eye contact. Later that night, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and stared out at the ocean. And I asked myself the question that would haunt me for weeks. How could they pretend I didn't exist? I wasn't looking for a handout. I wasn't even angry about the money. It was the betrayal. The fact that, in the end, I was disposable. An unpaid intern in their lives, forgotten. But something in me shifted that night. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. I was going to fight. But not with rage. I was going to fight smart. Did they really think I would just walk away? I kept asking myself that question for days. Did they really think I'd just walk away? Like I hadn't spent years building that business, holding it together when Brent was out partying in California? The betrayal didn't end at the will. A week after the reading, Brent showed up at the office like he owned the place. Which technically, now he did. He walked in wearing designer sunglasses and cologne strong enough to clear the whole reception area. And he didn't even greet me. Just said, "Hey, I'll need your keys and access codes. I'm restructuring." Restructuring? I was the only one who knew how things worked there. The client files, the contracts, even the landscaping teams. They all came to me with their questions. Brent didn't even know where the vendor invoices were kept. I handed him the keys. But I didn't leave. I stayed on the island, quiet, watching. I picked up temp work here and there, enough to pay rent. And every day I kept tabs on what Brent was doing to the business I once helped build. Clients started backing out. Reviews online turned sour. Rumors swirled that he was cutting corners. I wasn't surprised. Brent was always about shortcuts. But this wasn't just about incompetence. It was personal. He was trying to erase me, and worse, Aunt Marie supported him. She called me after I bumped into her at the farmer's market, said things like, "You're young, Rachel, you'll be fine," and David just wanted to keep things simple. Simple? Cutting me out of everything after I gave a decade of my life to that company? That night, I pulled out every file I had. Old emails, payroll logs, contracts with my signature, business tax forms with my name listed as managing partner. I didn't have ownership on paper, but I had evidence. And I wasn't going to waste it. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to have your back, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you're still here, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. This journey is just getting started. I knew I couldn't afford a high-powered lawyer, but I didn't need one, at least not yet. I went down to the state records office in Honolulu, pulled public filings, searched property records, even requested Uncle David's business registration history. I discovered something Brent clearly didn't know. The land the business operated on? The lot was purchased in both Uncle David's name and mine. It was signed over to both of us 5 years ago, a formality, he'd said, in case anything ever happened. Brent inherited the business, but the land it sat on? It was mine. And now I had leverage. What if I was never supposed to find that document? The moment I held the deed in my hands, something changed. It was almost like Uncle David had left me a silent message, a final act of trust. Maybe he couldn't write me into the will without stirring the family pot, but this was real. This was legal. And this was powerful. I stood in the county records office, staring at the signature. His. Mine. The lot the business sat on wasn't part of the will because it had already been transferred years ago. And that meant Brent might have the company, but I had the ground beneath it. Suddenly I had something Brent needed, and in business, that meant everything. But a question kept circling in my mind. What if I was never supposed to find that document? What if Uncle David expected me to move on quietly, not dig through the past? For a second I hesitated, but then I thought about all the times I'd stayed late to help clients when Brent didn't even know the names of our biggest accounts, about the times I worked through holidays while Brent traveled through Europe. I didn't owe them silence. So I went home, scanned everything, and started building a timeline. Emails, transaction records, calendar appointments with clients I had landed myself. I wasn't just proving my emotional investment, I was documenting my value. If this went to court, I wasn't going in unprepared. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Brent called me. It had been over 2 months since the funeral, and we hadn't spoken since he kicked me out of the office. His tone was suddenly polite. Almost rehearsed. Hey, Rachel, I was thinking maybe we should meet, clear the air. I agreed, but only if we met at a cafe downtown, neutral ground. He showed up in that same smug outfit like he walked off a yacht catalog, and sat across from me with a fake smile. So, listen, he began. I heard through the grapevine you've been asking about the business lot. That's fine and all, but I was hoping we could come to an arrangement. The translation, he found out I own the land and he's panicking. I leaned forward, calm as ever, and said, Brent, you've got 2 options. You can pay rent to use the land, or you can move your failing business elsewhere. Your call. He looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. I didn't wait for his response. I got up, left my untouched coffee on the table, and walked out. Because for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since the will was read. Did he really think he could intimidate me into giving it up? A week after our little coffee meeting, Brent sent me a lease agreement. It was laughable. He offered me $500, 0 cents a month, to rent a commercial lot in the heart of Honolulu where the business had been operating for over 20 years. That land was worth 10 times that amount. Minimum. But what really caught my attention wasn't the number. It was the expiration clause. The lease was for 6 months with an option to buy, for him. So let me get this straight. He cuts me out of the will, erases me from the business, then expects me to gift wrap the property for him 6 months later? Did he really think he could intimidate me into giving it up? I emailed him back, short and sweet. $5,000, 0 cents/month, 12-month lease, no purchase option, take it or leave it. Within an hour, Aunt Marie called me. Rachel, she said, her voice full of sugar and steel. This isn't what your uncle would have wanted. We're family. Can't you be a little more, understanding? I almost laughed. Where was this family when they read the will and left me nothing? Where was the understanding when I was shoved out of the office I helped build? I told her, calmly. Uncle David wanted me to have the land. That was his choice. You don't get to rewrite it now just because it's inconvenient. She hung up without saying goodbye. If you've ever had someone guilt-trip you into giving up what you earned, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe. You're not alone, and neither am I. A few days later, Brent agreed to the terms. He signed the lease. I became his landlord. It felt surreal at first, getting those monthly payments, but it wasn't about the money. It was about acknowledgement, about taking back something they tried to erase. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. I was no longer an afterthought. I was a force to be reckoned with. But Brent? He didn't take the loss quietly. He started looking for ways to push me out legally, trying to prove Uncle David was mentally unfit when he signed the property over, claiming I manipulated him. He filed a petition to void the land transfer. That's when I realized something bigger was coming. And if I wanted to stay standing, I had to be 10 steps ahead. How do you prove someone's love when they're no longer here? When I was served the court papers, I felt my stomach drop. Brent was accusing me of coercion, saying I manipulated Uncle David into putting the land in my name, that I took advantage of him when he was mentally vulnerable, and Aunt Marie backed him up with a sworn statement. It was all lies, but that didn't stop them from trying to bury me in legal fees and stress. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I had 21 days to defend a man who was no longer alive, to speak for himself. And that's what terrified me the most. How do you prove someone's love when they're no longer here? I hired a local attorney, a sharp, quiet woman named Leilani who believed in facts, not drama. I handed her every document I had, the deed, the timeline, emails from Uncle David thanking me for saving major client contracts, even handwritten notes he used to leave on my desk. But it still felt like I was grasping at ghosts. Brent, meanwhile, was parading around like a celebrity victim, posting on social media about family betrayal, flipping the narrative as if I had done something cruel. A week before the hearing, I sat at the beach at sunset, holding one of Uncle David's old journals. He used to keep them in his desk drawer, half filled with landscaping notes, sketches, and random thoughts. I flipped through the pages, hoping for something. Anything. And then I found it. On a crumpled page near the back, in his unmistakable handwriting, was a list, a personal one, titled, "What I Want If Something Happens to Me." The first line? Rahel gets the land, she earned it. She's earned a lot more, but this, at least, is hers. I froze. It wasn't notarized, it wasn't formal, but it was his words. I scanned the page and sent it to Leilani immediately. She told me it wasn't legally binding, but it could help support the context and intent behind the deed. And then came another break. One of Uncle David's former clients, Mrs. Nakamura, who ran a botanical resort, heard about the situation through the grapevine. She showed up at my door with a stack of invoices and a letter. The letter was from Uncle David, dated 3 months before he died. He wrote about preparing Rachel for the future, saying, "She's the only one I trust to carry this forward." It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough. Enough to raise questions. Enough to make a judge pause. Enough to prove I wasn't just a convenient niece looking for a payout. I was the daughter he chose. What happens when the truth finally has a voice? Courtrooms are colder than you expect. Maybe it's the air conditioning. Maybe it's the silence. Maybe it's the way everyone looks at you like you're either a liar or a victim. Nothing in between. I wore a navy dress, hair tied back, no makeup but enough strength in my spine to hold myself up. Brent walked in like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Tailored suit, smirk in place, and Aunt Marie clutching his arm like the world had wronged them. They thought this would be easy. They thought the court would see a young woman with no official title in the company and no place in the will and rule in their favor. What happens when the truth finally has a voice? That morning I found mine. Leilani opened with calm precision. She laid out the facts. The deed transfer filed years ago, the taxes I'd helped pay, the clients I'd managed, the handwritten journal, and, most powerful of all, the letter from Uncle David to Mrs. Nakamura. The judge raised an eyebrow at that one. Then Brent's lawyer came swinging. He said I manipulated a grieving man, that I planted the idea of transferring property into my name. He even suggested I may have forged the deed. But they underestimated Leilani. She called a surprise witness, Mr. Chan, our longtime CPA who had retired just last year. He testified that he had personally filed the property paperwork for Uncle David and remembered the exact meeting. How Uncle David insisted on adding me as co-owner because, in his words, she's the only one who's shown up for me consistently. Brent paled. Aunt Marie wouldn't meet my eyes. If you've ever had to stand up in front of people who tried to erase your worth, tell your story in the comments, and don't forget like and subscribe to support more real voices like mine. You never know who might need to hear this. When it was my turn on the stand, I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I spoke plainly. I told them about every early morning I opened the office, every weekend I gave up, every holiday I spent organizing invoices instead of watching fireworks. I didn't make it emotional, I made it real. By the time I stepped down, the courtroom was silent. The judge didn't rule that day. He said he'd need a few days to review everything, but I saw it in his face. He saw me. Not as a girl who wanted a handout, but as a woman who earned her place. I walked out of that courtroom not knowing what the verdict would be, but for the first time, I didn't need it to validate me. Because I already knew who I was. Was winning enough, or did I want something more? 3 days after the hearing, I got the call. It was Leilani, and her voice was steady. The judge ruled in our favor. The land stays in your name. The court found no evidence of coercion. I stood in my kitchen, barefoot, clutching my phone like it was the last piece of my old life. I'd won, but I didn't feel like celebrating. Because winning meant something else. Brent had nowhere to go. The business had been struggling for months. Clients were leaving, staff were quitting, and now he'd either have to pay rent he couldn't afford or vacate the land entirely. I went down to the property the next morning. The office looked run down. Overgrown grass, peeling paint. It hurt to see what we'd built, what I had built, fall apart like that. Inside, Brent was packing up files. He looked exhausted, older than I remembered. When he saw me, he didn't say anything at first. Then quietly he asked, "So, you gonna kick me off the lot?" It would have been so easy to say yes, to watch him struggle the way I did, to get revenge. But instead, I asked him a question I hadn't let myself ask in months. "Why did you do it, Brent? Why cut me out?" He looked at me like he hadn't expected the question. Then he shrugged. "You were always better at it. The business, the clients. Uncle David always acted like you were his real kid. I hated how proud he was of you. And I hated how much that made me feel like a disappointment. That hit harder than I thought it would. I realized then, this was never just about inheritance. This was about resentment, insecurity, a man who felt replaced. And I had a choice to make. I could evict him, take everything, or I could offer him a lifeline, but on my terms. I said, "You can stay, but I run the office. I decide who we hire, and if you cross the line again, you're out. Clear?" He nodded, eyes wide, no smugness this time, just relief. I left without another word, but in my chest something loosened. Because sometimes justice isn't just about punishing someone. It's about reclaiming your power and choosing how to use it. Taking back what's mine wasn't just about property. It was about me. It's been 6 months since that day in court. The office looks different now. Clean, structured, professional. I hired a small team. People who believe in hard work, who don't cut corners, who care. Brent still works here, but under supervision. He's quieter now, humbled, and honestly, He's trying. Sometimes, I wonder what Uncle David would think if he walked in and saw how things turned out. I think he'd smile. He always said I was the glue that held everything together, and now finally everyone else sees it too. But let me be clear, this was never about money. It was never about owning land or running a company. It was about being seen, about no longer shrinking myself just to keep the peace, about refusing to be erased from the narrative of my own life. Because for years I let them tell me I didn't deserve anything, that I was just the niece, the helper, the outsider. And for a long time, I believed them. But you know what? They were wrong. Taking back what's mine wasn't revenge. It was restoration, a return to truth, to dignity, to my voice. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's not a courtroom explosion or a headline. Sometimes it's as quiet as a signature on a lease, as still as holding your ground when everyone expects you to give in. And sometimes it's about choosing not to become like the people who hurt you. So if you're out there, if you've been cut out, looked over, pushed aside, let me say this. You still matter. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's will or their version of events. You get to rewrite your own ending. I did. If this story spoke to you, let me know in the comments. What did you take back in your life? What injustice did you overcome? I want to hear from you. And if you haven't yet, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More stories are coming and you don't want to miss them. This is Rachel, from Overlooked to Undeniable. And this time, I made sure they remembered my name.